'Twas the Friday before Christmas, and all through the week every creature was waiting for the disclosure leak. Next year would bring Epstein and Ghislaine with treats of 100 indictments for those pervert elites. For decades of secrets that would all soon be shared, all the people rejoiced as the deep state prepared. From saucers to space, all those people erased, our history stolen and almost replaced, except for a light that a few kept up high and held truth together, exposing the lies. So I say Merry Christmas to you and be well. Disclosure is coming, and may those goons go to hell. Welcome to the show. You guys, look at the lineup I have here. Oh my God.
What's up, boys? How's it going?
Hi guys, I'm glad you haven't shaved as well, Ashton, because I was a bit worried there. Like I'd run out of shaving foam, but like we can't compete with old Dave there, can we?
No, it'd take me forever to get where Dave's at. I'm trying to be capable.
Actually, when I was younger, I used to have a beard down like here. I had this whole thing that I could save 3 minutes a day by not shaving, so I could do more work in the day. And over 9 months, it came down to here, and I'm thinking, look at all the time I've saved. But yeah, I look like baby Jesus.
Dave, what is the plan with the beard? Is there a Zen thing going on here? Or is there any long-term plan, or are you just spontaneous?
Well, in Canada, it's wintertime, a combination of that, spontaneous, pretty simple. I've actually, believe it or not, I've trimmed it because this is like 6-7 months of growing it. So I know what Bob's talking about.
So where are you in Canada? Because I've got some people up in Calgary, and that basically gets to really inhospitable temperatures.
Well, I can tell you that right now I'm in Toronto, but silent partner of mine and I have a small laboratory out of Winnipeg, and it gets really cold there to the point where, at least for me, because I'm not used to it, but he is, for me personally, it hurts when I breathe. Like it's a pinching feeling. Yeah,
I went to Minnesota once, and that got down to minus 32, and that was pretty tough. Actually, you had to. They have all these cars where you turn a button and it heats on up inside the car for like about 30 minutes before you actually leave your house and leg it to the car and open the door and shut the door. But I was in Toronto this time last year, visiting George Hathaway, who sadly is suffering from cancer at the moment, but it's going well, the therapy. But it was about this time of year, and it was -2, and back in the Czech Republic it was -10. So I'd gone to a warm, sunny place. So Toronto actually has a much better climate than some of the north and northwest places, right?
Basically, you can equivocate it to New York weather-wise, approximately. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
cool.
it's
well, we're going to make the world warm with technology, right?
Yeah, or find ways to cool it off and prevent catastrophic boiling of the oceans. Runaway global warming, the melting of the methane.
Boiling the oceans would be a terrible waste of fuel.
Yeah, big time.
It depends on how you're doing it.
Exactly.
Right. So, cold fusion. Yeah. So, guys, those of you who don't know the lineup here tonight, Dave Rosi runs Generation Z. It's a YouTube channel, which you guys can go look up, Generation Z on YouTube. Bob Greenyer is, of course, the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. He studies all these EVOs, exotic vacuum objects, comes up with a lot of really interesting information and digs into a lot of the background history where other scientists found these anomalies and sort of reported them, but just didn't know what to make of them. And as we've seen a lot of times in science, it's easier to just say, oh, well, these things don't exist, and we're just going to, they're outside of our understanding, so we're not going to pay attention to them, and we're going to, continue to move forward with, the easier path, and it's gone on that way with a lot of things. I think, that was it. It's done a lot of bad to our society in general. This type of thinking and this type of treatment of anomalies when anomalies arise, because as you have with things like the Warren Commission, as we talked about on catastrophic disclosure series number 1, there's over 75% of Americans do not believe the Warren Commission's findings on the JFK assassination, and for good reason. We don't believe in magic bullets. This is nonsense. And the fact is, there's anomalies like extra bullet holes in the JFK, extra bullets. They had to explain it with this really whacked out way. The same thing with RFK, with extra bullet holes in the Ambassador Hotel that night. The presence of these CIA psychiatrists who end up being MK Ultra mind control doctors, connected to Jack Ruby, and also connected to Sirhan. So you have these anomalies that it's just easier for the establishment and for people who are, if you're in charge of this investigation and the government's breathing down your neck, it's way easier just to ignore that kind of shit, because it's just going to get you into fucking trouble if you talk about it. You know what I mean?
And if I can add quickly, Jeremy, the question also becomes, at least at the time, if you were to bring certain people from the DIA or CIA up to testify, let's just say that they were to lie or what have you, how do you enforce a system to ensure they don't lie? Right, because even with the UAP thing, one of the things we see today is I saw Mr. Jeremy, I think Corbell, asking Mr. Lakatsky a handful of weeks ago. Well, he says, Jim, what if you're brought up to Congress? And Mr. Lakatsky said, just lie, and just say no. I don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't. You know what I mean? So
worked for James Clapper, right?
Right.
We're pursuing Edward Snowden, the guy who made the leak because he saw James Clapper on Congress lying about the NSA spying program, right? James Clapper didn't have to run away to Russia and go into hiding. He's not a pursued felon or a fugitive of the law right now. Why not? He lied to Congress. So yeah, it's that easy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, the go-to move just seems to be to say, like, I can't recall, right? I think I've heard so many times when they just come on, they go, I can't recall. You just said I can't recall 40 times. You don't remember what you did yesterday? Like, come on, right? Like,
well, I think that
can't catch you, right?
That's to do with not finding yourself inadvertently lying to Congress. But the point about Clapper is it was found that he lied to Congress and there's no consequences. And it's about this whole thing about there seems to be no consequences for people like completely putting rubbish out into the world. There seems to be rewards, actually, in fact.
Big time, yeah. You make a movie about a debunked physicist that's 30 years old with an old story that doesn't have any real physics to it, and you're on iTunes and Netflix, and you're on Joe Rogan 6 times representing all of ufology, and that's.
But hey, it's got a rocket car in it, okay?
Can't think who you're talking about.
No, I'm not going to name names. You just have to but if people will figure that out. But anyways, yeah, it's pretty easy when you see. I mean, you might as well just call it a ficus because it's a plant.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's been really interesting to see these so-called disclosures in front of Congress is that if you go and look at the intergalactic propulsion paper that was presented by A.C. Holt in 1979 on the NASA's website, it's literally on the NASA's website.
Alan Holt, right? Yeah.
It literally has
study.
every single statement that was supposed to be revelation in that document in 1979. Literally everything of importance is already in that public document available on NASA's website as properties of what UFOs can do, which people have been saying recently is what the Tic Tacs can do. So yeah, field resonance propulsion concept. And in there, not bring it in too early, but if you look at the structure that they says will drive this intergalactic propulsion technology, it is exactly a toroidal moment structure with the magnetic flux reconnection that was established in the 1970s. And exactly, it refers to a 1976 paper where they fired a laser in Japan into a nonlinear plasma and produced over 1,000 Teslas magnetic field. And this is with a single pulse, which has been replicated in 2021 and published in a major journal and funded by basically every energy authority on Earth that's of any significance. And yes, if you go down there and you read it, look at that. No, go up
it's
a bit.
It's a plasmoid right there.
Of course it is, but and it looks at anyway. Go down. You can literally see in there about the properties of the spacecraft. Look, where is it? No, not there. You'll find it, and exactly tells you exactly everything that is supposed to have been disclosed was already available. That is your magnetic reconnection, and that produces the toroidal vortex flux in the center. So they didn't know this was the toroidal moment. But they did know that they could create these from laser pulses into nonlinear plasma, and that building something that was of this geometry would enable what Hal Puthoff says is changing the epsilon zero. And that allows you to change the rate of flow of time and the ability of electric charges to form. And because of the Aharonov-Bohm effect, it allows you to get around Einstein's restrictions on the speed of light. So it's known. Now, what happened to that? Because if you know my story, this is the same year that my father showed us 4 lights in the sky appear and go disappear. And my father is not an alien, but he was a top-level Mason, and he did know people in the UK Navy. And it would turn out that the location of those lights that are most likely projected from was at Shoreham Airport, which is the oldest purpose-built airfield in the world. My dad always used to go on about it. I actually flew a Cessna twice from there as a training flight. But just down the road, due west, there was an airstrip built for the Wright brothers the year prior, but it's the oldest purpose-built air base in the world. And during the Second World War, they used to launch a lot of aircraft from there. But that paper there shows that we have been told nothing new in the last 2 years.
Could I jump in very quickly, Bob, to stand on Bob's shoulders? There's a paper by, I think his name was Roger D. Felice in the 70s, give or take. And it basically substantiates and shows that from either a metric engineering perspective or from from a gauge vector field perspective, there's a lens Thirring frame dragging effect that occurs when you have these gravitational effects, which also, again, gives rise to these frictional drag forces that produce this exact visual as well. So I'd like to support what Bob was saying completely, because this gives rise to, again, the polarizability of the vacuum, et cetera, et cetera. So it allows for that gradient.
What was the name of that scientist in the paper? If you want to post that in the private chat, I'd like to.
Sure, no problem. I even have another paper I'd love to show the abstract and introduction of. I can send to you in the private chat here, Jeremy.
Get me some links in the private chat. I also want to take a look at that Lockheed Martin patent that Ashton had as well.
Yeah.
Do you mean the systems and methods for generating coherent matter waves?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. If you want to pull that up, I might even have it up.
Yeah, the matter waves.
Hey, Jeremy, I had an idea for an experiment. What if we were to take a powerful superconducting toroidal electromagnet and just shoot a makeshift particle accelerator at it and just see what happens? Like, do you think that would be enough to get the attention that we need? Like, I wonder if would we get like a knock on the door if we start to build any of this stuff?
I think that's what Atlas is, right? Isn't that?
Are you okay, Jeremy, if I sent it to you on Signal?
Yeah. You could send it to me on. it's hard for me to get because that's on my phone. I'd really like to get it in the private chat right here.
Can I throw PDFs into it?
They have this giant room full of detectors, and they smash the particles together inside of that. But so you were talking about putting it, you smash them together, make this a giant toroid.
Can we make a smaller version? Yeah, and if we turn it into a toroidal shape, I think what Bob was just talking about basically makes there be like that circle in the middle, basically creates the null field there essentially around the magnetic fields that are happening there in that pattern.
It's called a phase singularity. So if you can imagine a normal water vortex in your bath drain, and things are going this way and they're going the opposite way on either sides of the vortex. And as that goes down all the way to the bottom, at some point you get to a point where the particle doesn't know which way to go, and it also can't go up or down. And this is in the electrodynamic sense. Of course, with a normal water going down a drain, it actually does come out the other side. Yeah. But with a fractal toroidal structure, it creates what's called a topological monopole. It's not a real monopole, but it acts in every way that's important like a monopole. And at that point, the matter just is brought into phase because it creates the Aharonov-Bohm effect. And so you end up, for instance, with electrons becoming bosons, and then they can form a coherent electron bosonic cluster, essentially, and it just gets built and built and built. And also other matter comes to that point. So you've got ions and electrons being forced through this central point. But because dark matter, which I've been specifically told I'm not allowed to talk about by a US Navy head of research previously, but I talk about it anyway because I didn't bother to read his CV, which he decided to add to the email and say, look, you should see I'm a special executive service member. I'm sure you know what that means. No, I don't know, and I don't care.
British Navy, is that?
No, US Navy.
US Navy. Okay.
Anyway, so I thought, well, thanks for telling me I should talk about dark matter. The other thing it said I shouldn't talk about is gravity. So, like
talk about both.
Telling me to not talk about gravity. You obviously want me to talk about gravity, or I should be talking about gravity, in spite of what you're telling me I shouldn't talk about gravity.
Jeremy, I sent you to your email. I sent you a screenshot of let's call it a unique paper that's I don't believe is public, and then also I sent you the full PDF of the. Not Roger, Fernando Di Felice. The paper's called on a gravitational field acting as an optical medium, I believe.
And you sent that to AlienScientist. Oh, here it is.
There it is. Yeah. If we can take a look quickly at the screenshot of a certain paper, I want to be clear in saying it is not classified, but to my knowledge, it is not public either. It's from about 25 years back, authored by Dr. Eric Davis on graviton emission in the laboratory.
Not Eric W. Davis, who did the ball lightning study for the US Air Force in 2000 and late 2001, commissioned in 2002 and published in 2003. That one.
Yes.
The colleague of the US Naval Intelligence guy called Hal Puthoff. That guy.
Yeah. He also did the Air Force teleportation study.
Yeah, interesting.
I remember quoting that study, I think, at least one of the teleportation studies by him.
This paper summarizes how electrodynamics and gravitation are coupled in a Hamiltonian formulation, followed by an appropriate quantization scheme. From the analysis of the coupled field interactions, Hamiltonian, one can derive a completely classical scattering cross mechanism for generation of gravitons in lab experiments. Very interesting. Nice one, Dave. I'm going to enjoy lapping this one up. Thank you very much.
I encourage anyone to try and find it publicly because so far I have not been able to. That's why I don't want to get anyone here in genuine, like particularly you, Jeremy, in any legal trouble whatsoever. So I'll only provide with things that are not public, but also not classified. So this would be one of them.
Dave, have you noticed the subtext in parentheses? In brackets.
Publicly.
Yes,
high frequency gravitational wave
workshop. Yes, from the sponsored by the MITRE Corporation. So also look into what the MITRE Corporation is for those in the audience that may not know. So again, of
course, when Eric W. Davis was doing the ball lightning study on behalf of the Air Force, he was doing it for warp drive metrics.
I may or may not.
San Diego. That's where he was working.
If he had a company that would have contact information, I may or may not have screenshotted that out there because it's not my place to provide that. Yeah, but yeah, it can't.
Can I ask you guys a question? A scientific one, real quick. Sure. It's kind of conceptual, but like, how would you visualize the underlying fabric of the void? Beyond like space time itself, right? Because we know there's stuff in space, right? So, do you like for me, just to kind of prime you guys, I kind of visualize it like there's a matrix that we're inside of that's like projecting our reality onto it. Is that how you guys look at it, or do you guys look at it maybe more abstractly?
I'll let Dave go first, and then I'll say what I think.
It depends on the approach we're taking, but in a visual sense, I would say personally, I view it as exactly what you described, a sort of information matrix that underlies everything that we call matter, and matter would be comprised of, we could say, resonant particles or mass that resonates within the parameters of a certain object that comprises that. Now, what comprises that resonating mass, in my opinion, would be something where if we think of these sort of longitudinal slinkies that exist within what we call the quantum vacuum or the ether, when we are able to resonate the mass of an object, we are able to then resonate those slinkies. And then the question becomes, okay, can we manipulate it with sound, light, electromagnetism, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way that I view it. It doesn't mean that it's the only way or the correct way whatsoever. That's just my personal interpretation. So also in the sense of how space-time may in fact be sort of like an oscillating, undulating sort of, how can I put it, set of very slow, like kind of like water waves, but obviously not nearly as dense. But can certainly emit power that's far more significant than anything known at the moment.
So if I take a shot at this, essentially, and this is gonna make Jeremy's head explode. Having looked at a 2007 aluminium sample from John Hutchison, I found 4 quantized.
Who's supposed to be joining us, by the way? He's got.
Oh, that would be awesome. So I found 4 quantization levels of solitons similar to those described as producing quantum coherent nuclear reactor in 1992 by the awarded patent for Mikhail Solin. And these seem to be quantized such that at each next fractal level above, you were rotating the structure 90 degrees. And I saw these as being linked together through electric field and magnetic field alternately. I didn't know much about Maxwell's equations. I know what magnets do and I know what electric fields do. They kind of attract each other. So that's all I needed to know. I didn't need to know any maths, and that's what I was physically seeing. And so when I presented the basic structure of an EVO, because I knew that Ken Shoulders had said the exotic vacuum object is essentially a toroidal cluster, and that I knew that from the Bostic and Nardi work from 1948 through to 1980, they had shown these impacts of exotic vacuum objects, which they called plasmoids, hitting a witness material. They were D4D toroids, which had spokes, which I visualized as being the impact of a 90-degree rotated toroid in the structure that was impacted. So I concluded then in my presentation of the basic three level, because you only need to do a wheel within a wheel, and say that the lower level wheel is a fractal of the upper level wheel, and all the way down to twice the distance of the Planck's distance, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, that you can have that this was the structure of all space-time. And it was only when we found the collapsed wave function of these structures in a plasma reactor called Vega that was conducted in Holland and replicated in Canada by 2 MFMP volunteers, Henk Uren and David Bittier, that I sent that to the Russians, and they came back with this classified fractal toroidal research that they were doing, which I had been told by people that shouldn't tell me these things. It had been weaponized during the Soviet period. And you can imagine what the kind of weapons they do, because they produce gravity and anti-gravity waves, it would seem. So I was looking at that, and in the paper that they sent without comment was this 1995 paper by Zverblis. And he literally said, and with diagrams, well, you can only see it on my blog because it's translated. The Russian is translated, and I translated the whole paper, including all the Maxwell equations. So what happened was, he saw this thing in a Moscow basement in 1988 because he was looking at technology which had coils of coils of coils to interact with DNA directly through electromagnetics, because DNA is a coil of a coil of a coil of coil, right? So he thought that must be some sort of electric signal that goes through there that you could be interactive with electrodynamically. And because he was doing this kind of research, he was brought in to see this toroid, which was made of coils of coils of coils, or coils of coils of coils of coils. And when you energize these things with the 30 hertz AC, it produces a magnetic AC waveform, which they observed with a fluxgate magnetometer. And this persisted even when they turned off the power, and even when they moved the device, and it persisted for 2 days. And so he didn't believe what he saw, but he went to a guy called Nevesky, who is the chief physicist and mathematician for the Russian Academy of Sciences, and asked him to do a treatment, find out what this does. And basically what it is, if you have a current going in a line, the pointing vector comes off and dissipates. If you have a current going through a coil, the pointing vector comes off and dissipates. If you have a coil wrapped into a coil, the pointing vector comes off and dissipates. But if you have a coil of a coil of a coil, the pointing vector closes in on itself, and you can charge that and charge that and charge that. And if you have a coil of a coil of a coil of a coil, you have 2 pointing vectors that go 90 degrees to each other, and if one collapses, it energizes the other. So you can create what's called a vacuum current, which is self-stable, and it's an exotic vacuum object in that it does not need any ordinary matter to exist, and it persists for a long period of time. And this is one of the bases for these structures. Now, what he said in that paper They used standard Maxwell equations from the 1800s to prove this was a real thing, and it is a real thing that they could do, right? So you don't need any fancy maths, you don't need any fancy particles, you don't need any other dimensions to prove this from standard Maxwell equations, the physical observation, okay? Now, what he found was, and he said in this paper, is that the fractal toroid is the only fractal that can fill all of space-time and leave no branches or gaps. There's one option in the universe. And so my intuition that this had to be the structure of the physical universe was supported in a review of classified Soviet energetics research published in 1995 and provable from Maxwell equations. So I started with only physical observation of John Hutchinson's material, then physical observations of the product of ball lightning inside the vagary experiments, leading me to a model that was verified by the second aspect, and then it went back to classified energetics research. And then you see it in that AC Holt paper from 1979 as being the basis for changing the space-time metrics. So everything kind of lines up into a package. Now, why is this important? This is when it comes to the whole nature of the universe. A toroidal moment is not an electric field or a magnetic field. A toroidal moment has these moments. It can go up and down with amplitude and frequency. It has a precession angle, which can go in and out with amplitude and frequency. And it also has an angular velocity per fractal level from the upper scale all the way down at either 2 to 48 divisions, all the way down to twice the Planck's distance. So the ways you can encode information in this is phenomenal. And it's one, and the basis for this, in my understanding, is relic neutrinos, which are persistent across the entire universe. It doesn't matter whether you believe they came from the Big Bang or they're synthesized from supernova. Either way, they exist. And they are extra low energy. And they are about either 1.76 Kelvin or between 1.76 or 2.76, but they're one coherent matter through the entire universe, and they have their own toroidal moment, which means anything with a toroidal moment can interact with them, and they can be condensed because they have actual mass into ordinary matter. So they are means of gravity, they are a means of propulsion, and they are a means of consciousness.
Can I ask a quick question?
You have go on.
I just wanted to ask something about, so is it 3 or 4 toroids that is the secret sauce? Because 3, it seems like you reach a singularity, but it doesn't like produce extra, because then you said of 4, now you're producing an opposite. Can you just elaborate on that for the normies?
The moment emerges actually on when you just have a torus of current loops, right? But to make anapole, which was discovered in 1957 by Yakov Eldovich, right? You need oscillating currents on the, like colloidal currents oscillating on the toroid, and then an electric field oscillating out of phase, and that will create a phase conjugation at a mean square radius, which cancels the electromagnetic waves at that point, and only the scalar and vector potentials propagate out from that. Now, you have to control that quite in a complex way. And this is the basis for the communication patent that was submitted in 1993, 9 months after Hal Puthoff transferred the Psychic Spy program to Science Applications International Corporation, right? So he was working out how a brain could do remote viewing and stuff. And then he does this patent. And basically on June the 15th this year, at Sydney Technical University, the town I'm in right now, they discovered using nuclear magnetic resonance on the brain, functional nuclear magnetic resonance, that when someone is doing conscious cognitive tasks, they produce a vortex and an anti-vortex in their brain. So they are producing toroidal moment. They can interact with the toroidal moment fluid. So the answer to your question is specifically, you actually need the next level of torus up, and you need to have a fractal level for it not to need control over the electric field.
If I could jump in,
introduces this non-radiating boundary, and that is specified in the conclusion of Ken Shelder's 1987 book, E.V. A Tale of a Discovery. He says these are the perfect monopole oscillators. They can only be interacted with a scalar vector potential. They emit the scalar and vector potential, and because they are closed electrodynamic structures, you can charge them using scalar waves up to a point where, in David Freiberger's work from SLAC, he says you exceed the ability of baryons to attach themselves to the Dirac sea, and baryons fall apart. So it causes the complete collapse of matter. So the specific answer is yes.
Good.
You need at least, I think, a
3
4 or maybe a 3 torus. Yeah.
If I could add very quickly, the fine structure constant, which also gives rise to Feynman's path integrals, supports everything Bob is saying perfectly. And not only that, but to support what Bob is saying as well, we know that Hochberg and Visser showed it 1 out of 137 exactly. We know the Hochberg and Visser showed out of Los Alamos that all one needs to understand with regards to a traversable wormhole, or just a wormhole in general, is to understand just very simply the 0 point or the tip of the throat, because from there everything becomes fractal and scalable. So
yeah, so full
And
disclosure,
just-
I just want to break down space-time. I mean, that's really just what I'm trying to do. So I think you guys are giving me how secret how.
Just a little ambition.
Well, welcome to the club, though. I'm pretty sure that's been Jeremiah's mission, who sadly is helping a friend move and couldn't join us tonight, but will be.
I know.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll
that's
find him
right.
soon.
He's-
People have told me his name. We're coming for you, Jeremiah.
The thing is,
MH370X is coming.
Jeremiah, on one of my streams, at the end of one of my streams from a way back, he actually showed off a coil that he built, where
Levitating.
he painstakingly did all the windings of the wraps. So like, you took the coils, wound the torus, and then wound all those wires with another winding, and then if you go another level.
Jeremiah actually made a machine to wind the bagel coil, the coil within the coil within the coil that Bob talks about. This I actually made 10 years ago with my own hands, intuitively, the coil within the coil within the coil. And I've never actually fired energy into it because I'm like understanding what will actually happen, and that it needs to be in controlled circumstances and input and stuff
Do
like
it
that.
live, dude.
Yeah, we should definitely do that.
We will.
So how do we make it a part of the accelerator then?
Dude.
Go ahead.
In the more recent peer-reviewed mainstream journal published papers on what they call either hypertoroidals or supertoroidals in Russia and hypertoroidals in outside of Russia, they say that for these to work, you have to have each torus winding in the limit of the winding. And if you don't, it will not work. It also helps, although it's not necessary from the physical evidence to have mirrored, like at least even numbers. But it's not necessary because we see odd numbers as well. They just need to be perfectly placed if they're odd, right? In fact, they always need to be perfectly placed. The thing is about the winding is nature produces these things perfectly instantaneously. Whereas we are producing a very bad analog by having a single piece of wire, but it's the only choice we have. And then also, because of each level produces this phase singularity and produces coherent matter, you get a superconducting condensate. And so when the currents are set up, they don't stop. And they are constantly flowing at each fractal level in perfect toroids of toroids of toroids of toroids. And this just happens. And literally, Ken Shoulders exactly spelt it out. You just need charge separation. And then the most powerful thing he ever did was pass an EVO through a capillary. Now, there's Soviet research that was done in the 70s, which was released as a result of someone called Slobodan Stankovic, who showed something in 2019 that showed the same thing. They create it's called a plasmatron, and they have a microwave reactor producing plasma, and then they have a spark discharge which causes an explosion in there, and it passes through a polycarbonate capillary, and out comes these coherent matter traveling waves. And they studied it, and it's on the MFMP's YouTube channel. But these are the same things that we observe in Vega experiments. These are the same. So like, it's a very quick and dirty way to create the coherent matter traveling waves. And so, yeah, so it's a bit, we're getting to a point where it's very repeatable.
Jeremiah, we have your next experiment in challenge. I know. I can just see his eyes light up when he gets to this.
I want to be there.
Right?
Well, basically, that all that's doing is that capillary, both in the most energetic process ever observed by Ken Shoulders and these classic energetics research of the Soviet period, is you've got charge separation in the plasma, and then the explosion, and the same with Slobodan Stankovic when he was passing HHO through a graphite capillary tube. You're having shear. And because you can almost never go perfectly through a tube, right? You're always going at slightly an angle. You get multi-axis hydrodynamic shear. And this creates torus of tori that then lead to the coherence of matter, that then lead to the structure that is the core
Bob,
ball lightning.
you have a ton of really great slides and visuals. I don't know if you have access to all those because I know you're on
I don't, but I
right
can tell you what I do have. This is Matsumoto's book. Sadly, he died earlier this year.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And I think one of the most important experiments he did, which was effectively a replication of what both Pons and Fleischmann did in 1989, because this is actually submitted to American Nuclear Society's Journal of Fusion Technology on September the 21st, 1990. So this is pretty quickly after Pons and Fleischmann in March 1989. He put a piece of palladium electrodes in heavy water with an electrolyte and produced heat or whatever. But when he cut the electrodes open, he found that along the crystal grain boundaries, he found that it was eaten away, and it starts off being eaten away as little spherical areas at regularly spaced distances, as you can see in these diagrams on the crystal grain boundaries, and it ultimately eats the crystal grain array. So matter literally disappears from inside the palladium electrode, and around this boundary you get new element synthesis, which tend to be the elements in the Earth's crust, right? So some matter is completely lost, and this is what happened in John Hutchison's experiments in 1979.
And also in my experiments that I have to send you samples of on all of my electrodes.
Hold up the cover again.
Exactly that.
Oh, yeah, here. So steps to the discovery of electronuclear collapse. And what you've got here is a lead ball, and lead is 204, 206, 207, 208 nucleons. It's a sphere because it's inside this ball lightning structure. But out of the single pole, the topological monopole, you have a plume of carbon. And because carbon's only mostly 12, and it won't produce carbon-14 because it's radioactive, it doesn't produce radioactive material except for tritium. It obviously you can get a lot of 12 nuclei out of the inside of a sphere of piece of lead. Okay? And this is a simple experiment, and this is currently being replicated by some people that work at Los Alamos. Okay, the book is making a difference now. He published 100 of his own copies, handed it around at conferences, and only the Russians paid attention. And it's the arrogance of the West.
$10, you can't beat that. $10.
Yeah, I'm buying it right now.
Yeah. I can tell you we make, I think, 35 cents on that. It used to be 2 cents, but the cost of printing has just come down again. But it was almost at a point that I would have to have raised the price. But it's worth every penny because it literally walks you through the process. He nearly got everything right, actually.
Guys, another good book is I read this one, Fire from Ice, with Eugene Malov on the history of cold fusion. Malov was an MIT physicist who was on the team working on this, and basically said that MIT fudged the replications that debunked cold fusion and have been used by the patent
office. Well, they actually changed the data because he saw the data with the excess heat, and they removed it, and he got a new copy, and they literally removed the data 2 days later, and then that's what they then had a party plan to say the end of cold fusion.
I've seen that
also.
Yeah,
I warned Jeremiah about helping his friend move. Like that's exactly how Eugene Malov died. He was helping one of his friends move in the hood of Baltimore, Maryland, and they apparently got mugged on the street. And Malov was the kind of guy who was just not going to give it up, or just didn't want, and ended up getting stabbed by the robber. They never caught the guys. But
well, to be fair, it is Baltimore.
Yeah, I know, but it's
Seth Rich.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bob, I can't believe you're only making 35 cents on each one of those. This is the problem with science, guys. You're not greedy enough. This is why we can't get enough advanced.
You have to open source it. Otherwise, you'll either...
It's worse than that. We also make it free as a PDF download from remoteview.icu.
So I didn't even have to pay that $10 just now. Oh, man. Okay.
I
have a question for you guys as well, for Bob probably specifically. This Lockheed matter wave, do you think these coherent matter waves can create gravity then, or gravitation? He's not even here. Oh, there he is. Do you think that the Lockheed matter waves are creating a gravitational force, or what do you think their goal is? What do you think they're going to do with that?
So I'll use a phrase from the 2010 interview filmed by Nancy Lazarian with John Hutchison and Ken Shoulders. He says, "Gravity, I don't care about gravity. Give me propulsion any day. Propulsion works at any point in space. Gravity, they will produce propulsion. I suggest to you that they are also producing either gravity or anti-gravity waves, depending on the structure. But it's not important. They will wonderfully produce propulsion. There's several options for doing that. You can do mass rectification, because when you package material up into these structures, they can drop their mass to the mass of one electron. You can then accelerate them in even 240 volts, like a domestic socket here in Europe, to 1/10 the speed of light. And then you get them to hit a target. And as the containment breaks away, you actually get 1/10 of the speed of light of the previously mass and inertia shielded material hit the target, and it gives you a pulse, and you rinse and repeat. So this is one of the propulsion methods that was suggested by Ken Shoulders, just the mass rectification process. So like propulsion is far, far more valuable because it works when you don't have a gravitational body to act against.
So
if I could jump in very quickly to the matter wave patent there, these are just my personal interpretations, so I'm not claiming that this is correct or anything like that. But when I looked at the patent that you sent over, Ashton, it made me personally think of, especially when I was reading the description of it, it made me think of the Aronoff-Bohm effect. And when I think of the Aronoff-Bohm effect, when you look, for example, you notice that there's a phase shift that occurs. Now, if one can induce various phase shifts and then perhaps find a way, as Gertzenstein proposed, to turn a spin 1 photon into a spin 2 graviton, it makes me think that there may in fact be something there. Now, I know Gertzenstein's proposal was very controversial. I believe it was running an externally pulsed RF and photon field through a static B field, I think it was. Now, that's also an oversimplification, I believe, of the Gertzenstein proposal. But the idea is, particularly if you look at the image on the far left, this idea that you have these sort of pulse width modulated sort of oscillations that could in fact be amplified using the Aronoff-Bohm effect on a very, very minuscule level, perhaps even with superconductors. I think there's certainly something that could induce...
Dave, it specifically relies on the Aronoff-Bohm effect to create superconducting fluid condensates out of even fermions like electrons.
Right.
And there's two key aspects to this paper. In terms of propulsion, which was your question, it literally says the coherent matter wave can be used as a means of propulsion. So that's one, right? So that is one of the applications. And as I say, forget about anti-gravity. It's irrelevant when you've got propulsion, right? Because it works everywhere. It's much more important to have propulsion over anti-gravity. And then secondly, look at the structure in figure 3. That is the structure of the kind of structure you get, for instance, on the inside of the thunderstorm generator, these hexagonal and pentagonal structures. So if you look at the ball-like structure of a subunit of the coherent matter, okay? And so if you go, Jeremy, if you can wind on to, I think it's figure 3, the figure that's the front figure. Yes, that one. No, figure 3, the one that's labeled figure 3, not the third figure in the patent.
This one with this formation. This thing has a name, right?
The one that's labeled figure 3, that one. Yes. So that is the coherent matter structure, and that is, you get these balls, and they are obviously buckyball-like structures. And in fact, what was defined by Solin in his 1992 patent, bearing in mind this coherent nuclear reactor is in 1992, and they didn't make a Bose-Einstein condensate until 1996 or 1997, right? Officially, anywhere on planet Earth. He was literally calling it a coherent nuclear reactor. He says that it produces spheres and tubes. And if you can imagine, a tube is effectively just like a carbon nanotube, and a sphere is a carbon nanotube. A tic tac is like a carbon nanotube with two halves of a buckyball. This is exactly what it is, and in those structures, it has a Maxwellian, like 1864, vortex and anti-vortex structure that's built on those structures. And on the Henk-Uren Vega Valley, we literally see on the boundary exactly the structure that was predicted by Maxwell in, I think, 1864, being both in terms of spin polarization on the copper oxide, where you shine normal light on it and you have these hexagons which are either green or red in a blotch pattern, or in physical cones that have the golden triangle ratio pointing into the center of these vortices on the boundary of the tubes, which are a superconducting magnetic fluid of electrons. And that's what Ken Shoulders said that these things produce, which is fluidized electrons. And for fluidized electrons to exist, they absolutely must be coherent, because you have to overcome the Pauli exclusion principle for them to occupy the same space-time and to become a fluid. And so, yeah, this is consistent. And in fact, they do not give credit to Shoulders, which I think is a little bit rude, because the way they produce the initial emission of electron solitons is exactly the method that is described by Ken Shoulders. But to give them their ability to do this, I would argue that Ken Shoulders never gave credit to the 1930 something proposal by Tesla for his electrical particles of matter generator, where he had either a tungsten filament or a mercury, which would produce a Taylor cone in the electric field, produce a soliton of electrons, and that goes through an open-ended vacuum tubes. They use dry steam to produce a vacuum, and then what you have is the electron soliton traveling through the water, was exactly what Ken Shoulders found was the best way to create the most powerful exotic vacuum objects. And so this has a long history. So Ken Shoulders did not, and neither did Bostic. Bostic was clearly replicating what some things that Tesla did and never gave him credit. So it's fair. What comes around goes around. Ken Shoulders and Bostic never gave credit to Tesla, so then maybe they're justified Lockheed Martin. But they want to have a patent here, and they don't want to reveal that this was already known in the 1930s, right?
Yeah, I think Ken Shoulders at Lockheed Martin, you're doing Ken Shoulders dirty here. I mean, everybody steals everybody else's work, but not everybody's a multi-billion-dollar third-party contractor to the Department of Defense. So come on, they can throw one more credit in there for Ken Shoulders. Let's be real.
They could do.
Quite another question, a side note on that. So let's say, okay, we can make propulsion. I'm 100% all in on coherent matter wave beam, allowing to create propulsion. I love the idea that you don't try to negate mass, you just or force or gravity, you just make your own, right? And that way you don't have to even worry about trying to negate it. But how do you control it, right? Like if we go to the rubber band example, like do you use quantum entanglement to control where you end up going? Because it feels like this is kind of like getting on a surfboard, but you don't know how to surf, right?
So there's a whole group of Russians, and I did this atomic transmutations on, on nuclear matter threads or atomic transmutation. Anyway, it's a whole group of Russians that come together and they actually, I think, worked on some of the understanding of Matsumoto, but they showed that somehow these structures interact with neutrinos, and it produces what they called a neutrino rocket. And what they're saying is the nuclear reaction that is initiated by the background neutrinos or relic neutrinos causes a nuclear transmutation, and the spin is imparted onto the neutrinos, which do have a non-zero mass, and they are ejected out of the back. And I need to do a whole video on this to show in our Vega experiments how you have this spin wave that travels in front. But I believe that is the toroidal moment that's sucking in a flux of relic neutrinos, causing other similar non-radiating structures to interact with this, effectively the high frequency gravity wave, which then causes it to orbit around in the forward direction. Now, why is this important? Because the faster you go, the faster you can go with this technology. Because the feedstock is a little bit of nuclear matter that transmutes at a very, very low rate. But most of the yield and most of the propulsion comes from the pulling in and then acceleration, transfer of directional and spin out of the back of this fractal toroidal structure. So as you go faster forward, you are getting a higher density flux of the material that does the work, so you can go faster forward. And because it changes epsilon zero in the front, it actually lowers the resistance to it moving forward into the medium, whatever the medium is, regardless of what you think it is. It doesn't actually matter. It lowers the ability of charge to represent itself and repel. And if you look at the interview between Eric Weinstein and Hal Puthoff from February last year, Eric Weinstein goes to a lot of trouble to use the Penrose diagram, which I've been using in my presentations before that, to show the phase singularity, and that this is how you create the Aharonov-Bohm effect, which automatically occurs from fractal toroidal structures. And he says that this is the only thing in physics from 1954 that allows you to get around the restrictions on the speed of light, because it changes epsilon 0. And that is when Hal Puthoff gets a little bit nervous and he tries to divert the question. He says, and yes, you could, we can go even further than that. There are all types of complex toroidal geometries that which I've got 2 patents on, and I'm setting up a company for communications. And that's when I found his 1993 patent on creating a toroidal moment structure for non-dissipative, instantaneous communication, which can be encoded in so many ways.
So follow-up question real quick on that too. So then how do you are you limited directionally on where you would go with something like that? How do you stop in that kind of system?
It's extremely directional. You would break the stimulation of the confinement. So, and you would break it down. So what these structures need to operate is electrons. They love electrons. They live on electrons. And I'm quoting Ken Shoulders here. They need electrons. If you don't give them enough electrons, they will cohere the electrons they do have down into this coherent matter state, and they will fall off into a black state where they do not express any charge, and therefore they can't. Because they're not expressing charge and they're not going around in this superconducting loops at a fractal toroidal level, they can't express the toroidal moment, in which case they can't interact with the toroidal moment of the relic neutrino condensate. So you get to a scenario where it either shuts down because you don't feed it electrons, right? Or you can excite it and then maybe destabilize it. I wouldn't recommend that. I think actually what you need to do, you need to do this in a pulsed fashion. You need to do this in a pulsed fashion, because if you overdrive it, you might end up with the fractal toroidal structure. Its non-radiating boundary exceeds the boundary of the craft, but that actual non-radiating boundary has a zone where it literally destroys all matter. That's what's eating the spheres out of here. That you don't want to be on that boundary.
That's like if you have the Corvette and like you don't just step on the gas and go to 100 miles an hour right away. You got to pulse it a little bit, feel it out a little bit, right? See how much propulsion you're going to get.
Yeah, but also like if you wanted to travel through water, or you wanted to travel through a star or whatever, you would want the boundary to be fully spun up, because any matter interacting with that instantaneously collapses and its energy becomes part of the Borg, right? Here you've got to think of it like this. When you have a superconducting material, like if you have one electron and you feed it a packet of any bosonic energy, let's say a sound wave or a photon or even a bosonic nuclei or whatever, it will impart some of its energy to that electron, and depending on the dynamics, it can increase its kinetic energy vastly. If you have a Borg of trillions and trillions and trillions, like Googleplexes, like absurd numbers of electrons, all acting as one wave function, when the energy comes in, it has to dissipate through that entire structure instantaneously. So it's literally a Star Trek shield, but it's also a shield that will literally consume anything instantaneously.
But it also causes your shield to break down, right? If you were to hit something though, right? Like isn't your shield, let's call it your wave that you're riding, isn't going to kind of break down and collapse to pull you out of whatever propulsion you're doing, or how would that work?
So the way that Tesla found that he could interact with the neutral version of these clusters, partially because of material in your body. It partially interacts, but we're not when it's in this spun up state that it can destroy all forms of matter. And then he had this silver activated zinc sulfide phosphor, like on a Crookes tube, and he could do these live X-rays on it, even through a brick wall, right? And we're actually in the process of replicating this in Canada at the moment, but we're so scared because the Geiger counters we have, they literally go completely off scale even when we're outside the building. We don't know what type of radiation it is, but we do know that these structures, they go into scintillation photo sites and they emit a lot of electrons, and so it could be a fake signal, but at the moment it's topping out even at 2. The detector goes up to 3 mega electron volts, and we've just literally got a spike at 3 mega electron volts, and the whole thing is flooded. Like,
and you're saying this is outside the building, right? Not
well, he's going a long distance away. He's going behind different types of shields. So we're actually trying to build these Russian-derived shields for shielding against this type of radiation. So that what silver is the beauty of silver is it's solid state and it has the highest conductivity, which means it has the highest sea of electrons on its surface, which means the black state EVOs, when they hit it, it feeds them electrons and they go into the white state. Then they get trapped in the photo sites and they dissipate their energy over a period of time. So does that answer your question or not? I don't know. Maybe we lost the thread there.
Just so many things you've described I've produced in my electrolysis experiment. So I'm just going to back out for a few minutes and set up a bunch of example specimens of what I've produced. We can do a little show and tell, and then anything that interests you at the end of the show, we can finally package them up and send them away. And shout out to Joshua Bertrand. I showed some of the aluminum stuff that I guess turns out to be this aluminum aerogel that I've produced, and I'll try to show some of the zinc and as well as silver.
Well, aluminium goes to aluminium hydroxide often, but if you have it in electrolysis, it'll also go to silicon.
Yeah, I've got like 8 or 9 different forms of each metal that it turns into. So, and then the electrodes that you might be even more interested in dissecting and taking looks at. And I've seen a lot of what looks like almost identical effects of the metal of like some of the Hutchinson reactions on my own anodes. And then on the cathode side, it's the layers, the nano coatings that it builds of the different crystal lattice layers that quite fascinating stuff we'll get.
Well, of course, you've got the particles can be moved one side to the other side depending on the charge. Yeah, you see this structure here, which I've been sent a number of times, this UFO material artifacts. We've seen literally exactly this type of structure coming out of a spherical hole that was eaten inside a Lion reactor. So the Lion was he lived in Kenya and stuff, and he spoke Latin and Swahili and stuff. So he called everything Lion. But anyway, that's the why he called it Lion. But this guy called Neil Crichton Gold, who died earlier this year. But in one of his reactors, we observed in the diamond, in the core, a spherical section cut out. And in the pole of where the monopole goes in, we have a structure that looks exactly like the thing that you just showed there, right? And I think what it was, there was this thing in the sky and something fell out the sky, and it was this UFO metal artifact. Someone sent it to me before. But it's exactly this type of shape.
This is a 1952 Denmark case. So there's a big wave in 52, and another there was a big wave in 47, and another big wave in 52. And this one was actually dropped a glowing heart ingot of this metal, which was then recovered by Navy personnel. And
I would suggest that this was probably iron or titanium or nickel or one of these kind of elements in there, probably.
So are you thinking
you guys describe this? I can't help but wonder if this is also sounding identical to what Walter Bosley describes that he witnessed fallout of the UFO that he witnessed, and his whole encounter, I believe, from the 90s or early 2000s it is. I'll have to bring that up the next time, but he talks about seeing something like this molten liquid thing come out of it and then fall to the ground and then like solidify as it like went down or something. So
yeah, do you guys think that's like the byproduct of this type of propulsion, or do you think that is something that's required in order to achieve like, you know, a macroscopic phase conjugation state where like the outside is impacted but the inside isn't?
So there's two things here. The first example, I believe, is from the topological monopole that they get spat out, and it could be that it's just that may not have been a technologically produced device. It might have just been produced by nature, and it's a ball lightning. And out of the bottom of this large ball lightning, that conical type synthesized structure has fallen. Okay, the other one with the magnesium bismuth alloy. Obviously, bismuth is the most diamagnetic material that exists, okay, as a natural element in its natural form. And so one could imagine that if you had an extremely intense magnetic field, on either side of that, it's going to push or pull against it. So it's the natural choice for you to try and make a skin of a flying vehicle that was based on this technology, okay? Now, magnesium itself... and I think there's a difference in the isotope here, which might be because, like, for instance, one of the key things that you get synthesized of fusion of 2 carbon is magnesium-24. Okay, I don't know. I think there was some discussion about the difference in elements in there, but magnesium was one of the 3 elements of choice by Tesla to create etheric matter rays. Okay, it was either beryllium, magnesium, or aluminium. Those were the 3 options for producing clean etheric matter rays. It's much easier with hydrogen, but for a lot of, it wasn't easy to work with hydrogen in a way that you could fire a unidirectional high frequency, high power discharge into a metal sample. You can't really see the action when you're firing into a gas quite so easily. So it might be that the layers are synthesized, or they are produced as a matter of the flying process, because bismuth is actually the end. Actually, it's technically unstable, actually, but because it's an alpha decay, I think it's not affected by this technology. So when you do Lernge nuclear reactions, so if you take the work of S.V. Adamenko, in almost every experiment you produce lead. Why do you produce lead? Well, because the technology does not like to produce radioactive materials, and if it does, it almost instantly causes them to decay back to the most stable element that is non-radioactivity, which is lead. The question about bismuth is it's just a proton on from lead. So it might be that as a process of running this experiment, depending on whether you're spun up to flight levels or you're spun up to just like normal gravity reduction levels, you may have layers produced of different elements. And so the carbon gets synthesized by a proton and oxygen forming oxygen-17, and 2 oxygen-17s fuse to making carbon and how do you put it, neon-22. And then when you spin it up again, you get the carbon, like basically the 2 carbons coming together makes magnesium-24. So it could be, as you spin up and down the Crafts operation, you end up with these alternate layers of the heaviest element that is not a beta isotope, that is synthesized from the stupidly spun up, can go and do funky what looks like anti-gravity work, and when it's spun down, it actually leaves a thin deposit of magnesium or whatever else it is in there.
Are you saying these are like bugs splatted into the windshield, just like,
No, it's like if you go to a thermal spa, let's say in Japan, and you see these layers of mineral deposits, and it depends on the temperature of the time of year, the volcanic activity, and so on. And what you're doing is you're going through a process of switching on a device, switching it off, switching on a device, switching it off. And in those processes, it's like, I don't know.
That's interesting.
It's actually it's not made like that by human hands.
Yeah.
It's made by the process that creates the so-called anti-gravity, but I would prefer to use propulsion.
Nature itself.
Technology. Right. Yeah, it's a nature-made, natural process, nature-made product, and it probably isn't important. Like the inner skin might be a different material, and it doesn't matter that these bits fall off periodically.
Yeah,
it's kind of like sloughing on the bottom of a container ship. You have to clean off the rubbish, and it flies a little bit better, but it will still fly with it on there, and periodically bits fall off.
So it's basically just waste product, right? And it's just like, okay, well, maybe they shed your skin and
material as a result of the process that allows for the funky business.
Interesting. Oh, I wonder if that's like, if you go through a certain medium, if that builds up, or if that is.
It would be through air and water, particularly water. Because in water, you've got the proton and the hydrogen. So this work that we've done the final revision, and it's for Nature's Scientific Reports with the Taipei Energy Department of the top university in Taipei. We found that using water cavitation, it produces oxygen-17. And that's been proven by 3 different methods using the top gas analyzers for the Taiwan semiconductor industry, right? And that is antineutrino, electron, proton, and oxygen-16 fuses to make oxygen-17. And then the secondary product is oxygen-17 is highly paramagnetic. It goes into the fractal toroidal cluster, which is produced by cavitation vortices. and that then fuses to oxygen-17 to produce the carbon and produce the neon-22. The neon-22 is diamagnetic, so it leaves. The carbon-20 is diamagnetic, but it can still be charged and go through the center of the phase singularity. And at that point, you can then get fusion to produce the magnesium and stuff. So I just, when I look at that thing, it's not a mystery. It's just a byproduct of the process for the propulsion technology.
That's pretty cool. I wonder if you could, if computers are strong enough where you could like map an object and determine exactly the size of the field you'd have to create in order to create a barrier like that.
Absolutely, these are quantized. I shared a paper, I think, from 1992, I think, or whatever, where they were looking at plasmoids and the quantized level for producing the superconducting sphere. I think I shared that with you, actually, Ashton. And it actually produced these, in their very crummy diagram, they showed the spin vortices that get produced on the superconducting condensate on the non-radiating boundary. And these look like they're a real thing from our experiments. They're how they interact with actual matter. And so... but they have specific sizes. I've got this bugbear in my head that the Frank Polifka Windhex device we're trying to replicate at the moment. We tried to make a miniaturized version, but the problem is if we don't have it exactly the right quantization level, it will never work. It'll have everything that you think is going to make it work, but it's like we are a manifestation of this technology in this gravity and flux of relic neutrino in this part of the universe, right? So like our gravity defines our expression of the program that runs the universe, and it will only work in several quantization levels at a particular point in the universe, but it will be the same program, and there'll just be a different metric that you put in to define what it is under certain gravitational scenarios.
What's the name of the Windhex guy that I want?
Frank Polifka.
Frank, yeah. How do you spell the last name?
Polifka.
Bob, have you seen these aerogels that have been making the rounds?
I met a guy from Serbia who runs a hardware store around the side from me, and he fled from Serbia. The US government were dropping aerogels all over Serbia and stuff, and the kids were picking them up and what the hell is this, right?
What were they using it for? What was the point?
I have no idea.
No idea. Cool.
No one actually knows why. So there might be something there. I actually want to do a video of him just going over the experience. They literally, no one knew. It was all over the press and whatever. It was never in the international media, but they were dropping these incredibly light, but they don't know what it was coming from. I mean, it wasn't directly killing anyone.
They seem like they're basically metamaterials, right? I mean, you're messing around with the structures and substructures of the things. I mean, we were watching them, how they make them is incredible. I was watching a video one earlier today of one just floating when light gets shined on it, strong photons.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a metamaterial in the sense that it gets its properties of high heat resistance and also really lightweight from its structure.
Yeah.
Its structure.
I mean, the interesting thing you've got there is porous SiO2 there on the Westwood aerogel there. And of course, SiO2, if it's in its proper crystal form, is piezoelectric. And so it can produce a lot of interesting effects. So maybe it's involved. I don't know whether it needs to be involved. I mean, so there's things like perovskite, and perovskite naturally has toroidal moments in it, right? So there are, and they're looking at that for toroidal moment metamaterials. Yeah. So if you look at some of the more recent peer-reviewed literature on toroidal moments, they are looking at perovskite as one path to doing certain applications for things like communication and data storage technology. Okay.
Natural proton conductors as well.
Well, there's that, yeah. So like you've got two things going on which are good for this whole sort of process. They were looked at for actually so Binzhen Huang, who I'm co-authoring this paper with, he actually invented the first high-powered LED, right? And they've been running for 17 years in all these buildings in Taiwan, and 60% of them apparently are still running, right? These are the very first high-powered LEDs, right? And he says that I actually went to a solar technology sort of dinner after a conference that they had there. And they were saying that they used looking at perovskite because it has a much greater ability to change frequencies and capture much more light from photonic radiation from the sun, and you get a much, much higher yield. The problem is when you produce thin films of perovskite material, it's so incredibly prohibitive for use in solar panels. But that wouldn't stop if it has a use in the aerospace and military field. The cost wouldn't be an issue. The kind of cost that you're trying to get to for a consumer to run their energy, that's not an issue for the world of the military industrial complex.
Yeah, I think
they don't have a
me, yeah, it's interesting for me is just the material science aspect of it, right? This is like a pretty advanced material science requirement. And when we go back to that other metamaterial we're looking at before of the magnesium, bismuth, zinc composite, right? It makes me think that like that's being produced almost at like the atomic layer or thin sheets of the different metals on top of one another. That's what really impresses me, because I think that in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve from scientific perspective, breaking the fabric of space-time, you really have to have really extremely efficient material science, in my opinion.
I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that. And the reason is because ball lightning just gets formed in natural, and we are able to produce it at will incredibly easily, and we're just using hydrogen and electric fields.
You got any video? Can you show some videos of the ball lightnings?
Yeah, so like if you go to my ICCF 25 presentation, there is one of the late slides in that. We have a copper tube and we have the toroidal thing with the umbilical cord coming out. Now, the reason you can see the toroid is that the Sony Alpha that I'm using to look at that with, actually, that's actually with a normal iPhone, like high-end iPhone, but it's changing its exposure, so you can see through the sphere of the non-radiating boundary. You can actually see the condensing electrons toroid inside. Okay, so if you sorry, it's a bit crazy. I had to summarize 11 years of research in 20 minutes.
No,
keep going on.
I've seen you go over a lot of this.
No, towards the end.
So real quick, one thing about it I would say is that it's the production problem I have no issue with. But the issue I would have is you need control in addition to production, right? Producing the gravitational wave is great, but I don't want to end up inside the structure of it when I come out the other side, right? Like I want to know where I'm going.
In the north part of the Vesica Pisces, you are safe. I think it's like still quite calm area. And if you look, so I worked out that it's 48 from the 48 divisions on the Hutchison sample. Okay, you're looking for a tube with a little plasma toroid coming out of it with a little umbilical cord feeding it. It's a little bit further on than that, because I'm talking about how it works, and then I'm talking about the practical applications afterwards. So a bit further.
Guys, I'm so sorry. I got to take off because I travel tomorrow, but I just want to say very quickly, because I think this is the first time that I've conversed with Bob in particular. Bob, this has been absolutely fantastic, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on, because what you've been presenting so far is absolutely incredible. And I want to thank as well Jeremy, brother, for inviting me, and of course, great Ashton to see you here, and BurnEye as well.
Pleasure, Dave.
Shame
it's been fun, Dave.
So early, man. The party's just getting started. So
I know I got to get up early to catch a long flight tomorrow, else I'd stay.
Dave always comes in early, like makes solid points, puts it out, and thank you for joining. We'll see you when you can come again. And
100%. The other thing too, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jeremy, but I'd love to have at some point an open discussion back and forth with Mr. Desiato, if he'd be interested, with regards to the matter wave phase shifts that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. And even Bob, if you'd like to jump in, I was trying to lead up to a particular interpretation of the phase shift of the potentials in the system there, but
it's right there on the slide that Jeremy's showing. Afanasev and Dubovik discovered in his thesis in 1965, published in 1967, the toroidal moment. And he's talking, this is at Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, and this was some remarkable charge current configurations. I recommend everyone reads that. But the image that I've chosen there for that figure 13 is literally showing that these complex toroidal electrodynamic structures produce the Aharonhof bomb effect in the center. It's already, all the maths has been done. I think this is from 1992 as well. All of it's been done. It was all done by the Soviet energetics research, and the Americans probably found the same thing, but it was named differently. But they didn't have a proper understanding of it.
Right.
Dave, it's not over, man. This is just beginning. We're trailblazers in this field.
Right.
It's great to have an ally like you in this fight. So
Oh,
thank
thank
for
you.
doing
No,
that.
it's great to have allies like you guys. I hope you guys go for at least another couple hours because I'll
We
throw
definitely will.
I got to get to flight.
Exactly. Even if you guys have to go, we'll keep the discussion going. And thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you so much, Dave. It's been a pleasure to be able to interact with you as well today.
Thank you so
Dave
much.
and Bob together on another APEC very soon. So we'll have to contact him and get that going because get a full roster up. Also have Sal on there and a couple more, right? So be good. And finally, Jeremiah.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Later. Bob, I don't know if we can switch gears now that Dave's out of the equation.
Hold on, do you want to go just back a little bit? And you can show the structure. You're almost at the right place. Just go back a little. No, there. That's it. So if you go and download the presentation, when you don't have it underexposed, you see the full sphere ball from the edge of that tube. But with this massively underexposed, you see the internal torus and the tube that feeds it, the electrons from the copper oxide in the inside from photoelectric effect.
Okay.
And every so often you see a little flash in that video, and that is